All right, it's my pleasure to have Jie defend his defense today. I would like to tell an interesting story about Jie. So he had a very hard time with his master thesis. Really hard time, you know, and I think it was not the problem with Jie, it was the problem with me.
No, it's probably.
So we had a project where, you know, first, you know, Tao, one of Jie's colleagues, you know, was building copters, and the project went pretty quickly. And I said, okay, if the project goes really quickly with designing the drones, let's do it for hybrid UAVs, okay? And you know, I know that flying planes is actually not that easy, you know. And I said, okay, no, Jie, just do it, right? and you know, the first, you know, Jie worked with Mike here in attendance, and I think they said, let's 3D print these things. So basically, they printed these hybrid UAVs, and they tried to fire them up and get them going. Well, they couldn't take off. They were too heavy. So anyway, it took them some time, you know, to get this project going. But I think they had to learn so many things in the process. So they had to pretty much learn, you know, how to build these hybrid UAVs, and they had to also, Jie had to learn how to fly them. He'd never flown one of those before. So I think it's not easy. So I really think that, you know, I think after this initial master thesis, I think that the PhD was a breeze for Jie after that. Anyway, so here we are, and Jie is going to defend today. All right, it should be a breeze.
Yeah, thank you for your introduction. Okay, all right. And thank you everyone for coming here or joining remotely. And just know that this presentation will be recorded, and please make sure to mute yourself during the talk, and hope you will enjoy this presentation. Now let's get started. So today I'm excited to present my work during my PhD. And my PhD thesis focuses on identifying some key challenges in computational robot co-design and developing corresponding techniques for optimizing both the shape and control of robots. Okay. So to motivate why we need to do some co-design of the robots, let's first look at organisms in the nature. Nature has evolved tons of those creatures over tens of thousands of years to be so skillful for different tasks. To be successful in their special skills, every creature here has its own very special body mechanism to be able to complete different corresponding tasks easily. And the same analogy happens to the robots. Here are a few representative designs from terrestrial robots, manipulator robots, aerial vehicles, and underwater robots. And it can be seen that those robot designs are very diverse and highly optimized for the specific tasks. Although a proper robot design is so crucial for the task performance, designing and optimizing a robot is actually very, very challenging and time-consuming. For example, think of the Atlas humanoid robot from Boston Dynamics. It takes a genius team almost 10 years to evolve from the previous Petman version to the optimized Atlas model. So why is it so hard? And it takes so long to evolve this model. So let's take a close look at what is a robot design actually. Or in other words, what are the components the designer should consider when designing a robot? And similar to the nature creatures, most robots are composed of two main components, the body and the brain. The brain is responsible to tell the robot how to make actions based on the observations of the world. On the other side, the body is more complicated and is corresponding to the robot hardware. It includes robot morphological shape, the sensors, the actuators, and etc. And to simplify the problem a bit, in this thesis, we consider the morphological shape as the main design variable in our robot co-design problems. And however, even modeling the hardware shape only is complex enough. To specify the hardware shape, we need to decide on some discrete variables, such as the topology of the robot, the number of limbs, how those limbs connect to each other, and what type of joints are to be actuated. And we also need to decide some continuous shape parameters, such as the size of each limb, the mass properties, and the frictional coefficients of each limb. So to design such a robot for given tasks, traditionally, a robot expert needs to first empirically specify all of those shape and control variables. Then it has to manufacture the design and and to evaluate the performance of the design in the real world. And after that, based on the evaluation performance, she needs to come back to improve the design based on her personal experience. And each such manual design loop typically takes several days or even months. And a typical robot design process usually requires tens or even hundreds of such iterations before completion. And furthermore, the optimized robot design from this process highly relies on the expert's knowledge and can be limited by the expert's priors. Computational robot design tries to improve this process by minimizing the human intervention in each stage. First, it replaces the manual design phase with a computational robot design representation so that we are able to numerically represent robots by a set of shape and control parameters. And next, instead of manufacturing and evaluating the robot in real experiments, it computationally evaluates the robots inside the digital simulators. And finally, and most importantly, the manual improvement phase will be replaced by a computational optimization algorithm to automatically improve the robot design parameters. And the replacements of these three stages then successfully build a fully automated and computational robot design process. And to achieve this ultimate computational pipeline, we argue that there are a few key challenges and several system design choices we have to tackle in each part. Let's first start from the design representation part. The first question we encounter here is that what's the best computational representation for the robot shape? Or specifically, how to effectively represent the discrete topology, how to represent the continuous shape morphology, and how to represent both of them simultaneously are the very first challenges we have to deal with. The second design choice is how to represent the robot control. We have two options here as well. We can either use an open loop control sequence to represent the control, or use the more sophisticated neural network control policies as our control representation. And next, in order to optimize for the robot designs, we need some performance matrix to guide the optimization algorithms. An effective performance matrix must reflect the human subjective comparisons among different designs. We have two choices here as well, single objective matrix or multi-objective matrix. While single objective representation is simple to start with, most tasks in real world are evaluated by multiple criteria. And robots in real life are also usually optimized or designed for completing multiple different tasks instead of just one single task. And once we have the proper robot representation and the task, the evaluation matrix, the next and the biggest challenges for us is how to optimize the robot design parameters to maximize its evaluation matrix. And there are a lot of interesting and challenging optimization problems to be solved here. First, within the single objective scope, we need to consider whether we want to just optimize for the robot control with the robot shape to be fixed, or we want to improve the robot shape and control simultaneously. And for the shape part, the optimization problem can also be very different depending on which parts of the robot shape are to be optimized. And then all of those optimization problems happens again for the multi-objective case as well. And as we can see, there are so many interesting challenges and problems throughout the whole computational robot design pipeline. And in my thesis, we try to contribute a small pace toward this ultimate goal by proposing our solutions to some key challenges we have identified here. In the first part of this presentation, I will introduce how we represent the discrete topology and the continuous morphology of a robot. And then in the second part, I will present in detail how we handle the single objective robot optimization for control problems with the fixed robot shape, and how we do the co-optimization for both the robot continuous shape parameters and the control, and how we further co-optimize for the robot discrete topology and along with its control strategy. And in the final part of this presentation, I'll briefly show our efforts on multi-objective robot optimization problems. Okay, now let's get started for the first part, the robot shape representation. To computationally optimize the robots, The first problem we will need to address is to represent a robot in a computational way. To be noted, I will probably use the words parameterization and representation interchangeably during my talk. And okay, all right, so what's a good robot shape representation? An ideal shape representation should result in a compact parameter set while also being able to express tons of different designs. And it should also work for articulated robot designs with complex geometries. And it should also always produce valid designs that can be easily manufactured. And more importantly, the representations should be amenable to efficient optimization algorithms. We propose different representations for robot discrete topology and continuous morphology. And I will take the manipulator design as an example to illustrate our solutions. So I'll first present our continuous shape morphology representation with the topology of the manipulator to be fixed. This is part of our RSS 2021 paper. And before our work, previous works typically solve this representation problem by modeling each robot component by primitive shape. However, those primitive shapes can't describe the very complex designs required for interesting manipulation tasks. And in contrast, we propose a deformation-based hierarchical robot morphology representation, and our method works for articulated robot designs with arbitrary geometry shape and is able to parameterize the shape in a differentiable way while also being able to preserve its manufacturability of the design. Our deformation-based parameterization is inspired by cage-based deformation methods, which have been widely used in computer graphics to deform a high-resolution mesh in a real-time and feature-preserving manner. By defining a coarse cage around the mesh, it first pre-computes a normalized barycentric weight vector for each mesh vertex to establish a mapping between the locations of the cage handles and the mesh vertices. And then by moving around those cage handles, the underlying mesh changes its shape accordingly using those pre-computed weights. And in other words, the high resolution mesh is parameterized by this low resolution cage. To apply this cage-based deformation to our articulated robot design representation problem, we associate each basic component with a predefined cage around it and pre-compute the deformation weights. When we construct the manipulators, we just need to select a combination of those basic components and merge their predefined cages and then reuse those pre-computed deformation weights. So based on this high-level idea, here is our proposed hierarchical parameterization for the articulated robot designs. We start from a set of high-level cage parameters, for example, the width, the height, the depth of the cages. And then our algorithm computes the locations of cage handles. And then those cage handles in turn deform the underlying mesh of each component through the cage-based deformation in real time. And from that, we can calculate the kinematics and dynamics parameters of a robot required by simulation or other evaluation platforms. And each step here is computationally efficient, analytically differentiable, and also preserving the manufacturability of the design. Here we show two examples of applying our deformation-based representation. First is a single finger model, and this is in its rest shape. And we parameterize it with our approach and randomly sample the cage parameters to produce several variations of it. And as we can see, the generated designs successfully keep the connectivity while also preserving the geometry feature of the design. And here is another example of the two-finger robot manipulator. And here are its variations produced by our parameterization. And we further validate the manufacturability of the produced designs by 3D printing each component and assembling them together. Now we have shown our representations for continuous shape parameters. And next, I will present how we represent the discrete topology of a robot. This is part of our work presented in this year's ICRA. And with our approach, we are able to generate many different and valid manipulator designs very easily. And our approach starts with using a graph representation for each robot's topological structure. Simply speaking, we can convert any robot structure into a graph. And each graph node here is corresponding to a component of the robot. And each graph edge here is corresponding to a physical connection between two adjacent robot components. And while we can easily convert a robot structure into a graph, it's actually not necessarily valid for the reverse conversion. This is because if we arbitrarily construct a graph, it can result in some invalid design. For example, two adjacent graph nodes are probably not physically compatible for the connection in the real world. Thus, we cannot directly treat the graph as our representation for the optimization problem, since the optimized graph might be an invalid robot design. And therefore, it requires us to further invent ways to constrain the graph space to be valid. And we achieve this by graph grammar. And specifically, a graph grammar includes a set of robot graph generation rules. Each rule either expands a non-terminal assembly node into a subgraph or replaces a non-terminal node with a realizable part to finalize the design. And the grammar rules are built in a way to satisfy the manufacturing constraints. And we construct two grammars here, one for the manipulator palm generation and another one for the finger generation. And the palm grammar is defined as a grid structure as shown here. And here's one example is that from a starting symbol W, we can iteratively apply different rules to generate the palm structure. And the green parts here represent for the non-terminal assembly nodes, while the yellow parts are for the terminal nodes. And the finger grammar works in a regular graph structure and is applied after the palm grammar is finalized. So once we have the palm structure, we apply the finger grammar to generate the finger topology. And the rules here can either extend a finger or fork a finger into two separate branches. And similarly, by applying different finger grammar rules, we can generate different finger topologies. So by leveraging the palm grammar and the finger grammar together, we can successfully define a manipulator topology space that only includes valid manipulator designs. And formally speaking, we parameterize each manipulator topology as a palm grammar rule sequence followed by a finger grammar rule sequence. And the rule sequence here is able to generate a robot graph, which is then corresponding to a valid robot topology design. And here are a few designs we generated by applying different rule sequences in our graph grammar-based representation system. We have shown how to represent the continuous shape parameters and how to represent the discrete shape topology of a robot. Now, if we combine these two representations together, we can successfully represent any discrete and continuous part of a robot shape. And specifically, we built a two-stage hybrid representation for robot design. In the first stage, the graph grammar rules are applied to construct the topological structure of the robot. And once the topology is determined for the manipulator, the representation process then enters the second stage, where the deformation-based representation works to determine the continuous morphology of each manipulator component. And here is an example. And here is we built a manipulator user design interface to demonstrate our hybrid representation. And so it will start from the palm grammar to construct some palm structure. And then once it's finished, it goes to the finger grammar to apply some rules to generate the finger structures, topologies. And then once the whole topology of the whole hand is finished, then we enter the deformation-based representation part to change the morphology shape of each individual components by the cage-based deformation. So it's the whole process of how we can build a manipulator from our interface and from our representation. And here are some manipulator designs built from our user interface, and all of them can be successfully manufactured and perform tasks in the real world. And the blue covers here are knitted tactile sensors we put onto the manipulators. In summary, to represent the shape of a robot, we use a sequence of grammar rules to parameterize its discrete topology. And then we use a set of cage parameters to parameterize its continuous shape morphology. Now we have our computational representation of our robots. Then the next question is how to leverage those representations to do the robot optimization. we will first focus on the single objective robot optimization problems. To optimize a robot, we have different options. We can either optimize its control only, as most robotics people do, or we can co-optimize its shape and control together. We will first delve into the problem of control optimization with the topology and the morphology of the design to be fixed. Specifically, given a task and the fixed robot topology and morphology, we are interested in how to optimize a neural network control policies for this robot, for the given task. And as we know, reinforcement learning has shown to be a very successful tool for policy learning on many complex problems, such as in-hand manipulation tasks and humanoid character control tasks. However, reinforcement learning typically requires large amounts of samples, especially for high-dimensional problems, and it makes the learning very expensive and time-consuming. In this thesis, we argue that a differentiable physics simulation can significantly help improve the learning efficiency of the control policies. So what's a differentiable physics simulation? Before talking about the differentiable simulation, let's first talk about what is a simulation. In a policy-based control problem, we usually have a policy model as pi theta, and at each time step, this pi theta will take the current state of the robot as input and outputs the actions of the robot outputs the action for the robot to execute. And the state here can be the positions, the orientations, the joint angles, and the velocities of the robot. And the actions can be the motor command of the actuators. Once we have the policy generates the action command, the simulator will execute this action and predicts what's the new robot state according to the physics law. And the simulation and the policy repeat this process for each time step and until it reaches the end of the task. Then a task-related objective function will be defined as a function of the states and the actions to evaluate the performance of the policy. And our goal is always to optimize this the policy parameter theta to minimize or maximize this policy loss function. And that's what typically we do with a traditional physics simulation. And a differentiable physics simulation will not only do this forward simulation path for us, but also computes the backward gradients. Specifically, it can pass backward the gradients of each simulation step throughout the whole trajectory and obtains the analytical gradients of the objective loss with respect to the policy parameters. And you can simply think of each simulation step F as a layer of the neural network where the gradient function is customized by our differentiable physics simulation. And once we have the partial loss, partial theta computed, ideally we can apply any numerical gradient-based optimizer to optimize for the policy parameter theta. And we use a tactile-based control example from our recent submission to demonstrate the power of differentiable physics simulation. And in this work, we developed a differentiable physics simulation to simulate high-resolution tactile sensor feedback for the manipulation tasks. And here is the tactile-based box pushing task. In this task, a WSG50 gripper is equipped with a GeoSlim sensor at the fingertip. And the task of the gripper is to push the box to a random goal location and orientation. And to increase the difficulty of the task, the box location is randomized, is randomly initialized, and a random external force is applied to the box at each time step. And the input observation of the policy include the state information of the gripper, the goal location and the goal orientation of the box, and the tactile sensor readings. And to be noted, there is no any box state information observed by the policy. And here is the policy optimized by the PPO. And here is the policy optimized by the gradient-based gradient descent algorithm enabled by our differentiable physics. And here are some, here is the same policies, but with different goal locations and goal orientation. And here is for the gradient descent method. And as we can see, the policy optimized by differentiable physics can be more accurate and with higher performance. And here are the training curves comparison between the PPO and numerical gradient descent. And as shown in this plot, the differentiable physics simulation can converge to a better policy and also be much more data efficient than the gradient-free method. So it seems to be a very positive support for differentiable physics simulation. However, does it mean that a differentiable physics simulation plus a naive gradient descent solver is all we need for the robotics control problems? And the answer is clearly no. First of all, each simulation step is nonlinear and non-convex. And this problem becomes even worse when those simulation steps are concatenated together. The resulting optimization landscape can be highly non-convex and contains a lot of local optima points. And this can be a nightmare for the first-order gradient-based optimizers. And second, when we have a long horizon task, backpropagating the gradients throughout the whole trajectory will easily get the gradient explosion or gradient vanishing problems. And finally, to handle policy failures and improve the learning efficiency, early termination techniques are widely used in policy learning. However, such early termination tricks will introduce additional discontinuities to the optimization landscape and make the analytical gradient-based method less successful. And here is the example of the optimization landscape of a humanoid problem. And we take a neural network policy during training and simply change one single weight of the policy and plot the performance of the new policy variants. As expected, the landscape is super noisy and even discontinuous. And we cannot imagine that how a gradient-based method can work very successfully in such a landscape. And because of those problems, how to correctly leverage the differential physics simulation in complex robot control tasks is still a very open problem to the community. And we explore this open problem in our work presented in this year's Archive. The first thing we did in this work is to further improve the computational efficiency of the differential physics simulator by leveraging the GPU parallelization. By massively parallelizing over GPU cores, our simulator is able to simulate hundreds of robots in parallel and compute the gradients simultaneously. And the main contribution of our work here is a new differentiable simulation-based policy learning algorithm. We call it Short Horizon Actor Critic, or SHAC. We demonstrate on various tasks on SHAC that our SHAC algorithm can effectively leverage the parallel differentiable simulation to learn better policies and achieve significantly better sample efficiency, and more importantly, being more work clock time efficient than the existing methods. Our SHAC algorithm is inspired by the actor critic methods in RL, and it combines the differentiable physics simulation approach and the ideas from the reinforcement learning community to achieve the best of both worlds. Specifically, SHAC split the long trajectory into many short horizon windows, and a multi-step reward in the sub-window plus a terminal value estimation from a learned critic is used to compute a surrogate policy loss function. And the differentiable simulation here allows us to better exploit the dynamics inside the window, while the terminal value estimation encourages for more promising long-term performance. And with this formulation, we only need to backpropagate the gradients inside the windows, which successfully mitigates our gradient explosion problem. And in the meantime, the terminal value function absorbs the noisy and discontinuous landscape over future long horizons into a smooth neural network function to reduce the number of local spikes, thus alleviates the local optima problems. And the truncated simulation window here in each learning episode also significantly saves the memory cost of the simulation, which enables us to effectively leverage the developed parallel differentiable simulation to simulate many environments in parallel to achieve a much higher work clock time efficiency within the same amount of memory budget. And we test our method on 6 benchmark problems. Here I show 4 of them, which include 3 classical RAO benchmark problems with increasing difficulties from card pool to ant to humanoid, and 1 high-dimensional muscle actuated humanoid problem with a 152-dimensional action space. And we compare our method to the state-of-the-art implementations of reinforcement learning algorithms and various differentiable simulation-based methods. The first row compares the sample efficiency, while the second row compares the work clock time efficiency. And red curve is for our method. And as we can see, by combining reinforcement learning and gradient-based methods, our approach SHAC achieves the highest reward on all the problems and only takes minutes to optimize for the policies. And even for the most complex muscle-actuated humanoid problem, Shark only takes about 1 hour to convert to a perfect policy. And here are the visualizations of learned policies. First is the carpool, and then is the ant, and humanoid, and the last one is muscle-actuated humanoid. And as we can see, the policies optimized by our method are also qualitatively reasonable and with great performance. Now we have shown how we can leverage the differentiable physics simulation to accelerate the control policy learning for robots. So can we do even more with the differentiable physics simulation? So how about for the robot shape optimization? The answer is yes. And let me now introduce how we can leverage the differentiable physics simulation to help us co-optimize the continuous co-optimize the continuous shape parameters and the control parameters of the robot. The high-level idea here is that differentiable physics simulation can take that a physics simulator can take not only the state and action as input parameters, but also the robot physics parameters as input, and such as the actuator locations, mass inertia, and the contact point locations of the on the robot body. And similarly, when deriving the simulation gradients, we can derive the gradients of the objective loss with respect to both the control parameters as well as the robot physics parameters. And then the computed gradients can assist us to optimize the robot shape with gradient-based optimization easily. So with this high-level idea, let's go into this diagram again. So suppose now we have a differentiable physics simulation with the gradients to all the robot physics parameters and control parameters. We still have one thing missing here, which is the differentiable conversion from the shape parameters in the optimization to those simulation-related robot physics parameters. And fortunately, that's exactly the continuous shape morphology representation we discussed earlier in this presentation. So here we build an end-to-end differentiable framework for robot co-design. Given a fixed robot topology, the framework starts with a hierarchical deformation-based parameterization for the robot morphology. And here we use a set of high-level cage parameters to control all the simulation-related kinematics and dynamics parameters of the robots. Then the differentiable simulation takes the control parameters and the converted simulation parameters as input and evaluates the performance. The differentiability of each step here allows us to backpropagate the gradients of the loss through the whole pipeline to the morphology and control parameters. And then it enables us to use efficient gradient-based optimization for robot co-design. And we test the efficiency of our framework on 4 core design tasks: the finger reach, the flip box, rotate cube, and assemble task. I'll introduce 2 of them here in detail. So in the first task, the finger is required to flip a heavy box. And the video on the left shows that it's insufficient to only optimize for the control. And by co-optimizing the shape and control together, an interesting hook-like structure is evolved to hook on the back surface of the box to flip over the box more easily. And we compare our method to the gradient-free methods such as CMA-ES, 1+1-ES, and reinforcement learning-based approach. The results show that our method is able to find better morphology and control combinations while only using 10 to 20 times fewer simulation iterations. And the next task requires 2 fingers to collaborate together to accomplish an assembling job. The optimized morphology has a longer right finger and shorter left finger to be able to reach the 2 objects of different sizes. And furthermore, the large and flat fingertip helps to push the cube more stably than a thin and curved fingertip. And we further test the manufacturability and functionality of the optimized design for the flipping box task in the real-world experiments. We conducted some stress tests on the cubes of different sizes to test its functionality and robustness. And the experiment shows that the manufactured fingers can successfully flip the cubes in the real world. And in conclusion, in this work, we present a numerical optimization method for co-designing the continuous shape parameters and the control of a robot. And such kind of numerical optimization is computationally efficient since it highly exploits the underlying parameterization and dynamics model provided by our end-to-end differentiable framework. And we have now shown that differentiable physics simulation can help us co-optimize the control parameters and continuous shape parameters. But how about for discrete shape parameters? So unfortunately, the inherent limitation of the numerical gradient-based approach is that it requires the optimization variables to be continuous. A simple illustrative example is that if we change the topology of the manipulator, then the number of control degrees of freedom changes. So we can no longer even have a fixed number of control variables to be optimized by our optimizer. So next, let me show how we solve this challenging discrete optimization problem by leveraging some machine learning techniques. Our algorithm is part of the work presented in SIGGRAPH Asia 2020, and we use the terrestrial robot design problem as an example to demonstrate our method. In this task, we use a graph grammar-based representation I introduced earlier, and just to give a brief recap of it, we use a graph. We use a graph to represent each terrestrial robot design, and each graph node here is corresponding to a component, and each graph edge here is corresponding to a physical connection between two components. And we use graph grammar to represent the valid robot design space. And starting from a non-terminal node, we can apply different grammar rule sequences to obtain different valid robot designs. However, the grammar design space provides us an extremely large combinatorial search space for the searching algorithm, which makes it very challenging to have some to invent some algorithm for it. So how to do the search? To illustrate the high-level idea, let's first take a look at the grammar search space. For simplicity, we can think of the search space as a tree-like structure. Each dashed node inside the tree represents a partial design, and each leaf node here represents a final complete design. And starting from the start symbol, we can iteratively apply different rules to enter different branches in this large grammar space, in this search space. And in our grammar, we have about 20 different rules to be applied and allow the algorithm to apply at most 40 different rules for a design. So it can iteratively apply 40 times for different rules to complete a design. And a very rough calculation of the number of rule paths covered by our grammar space is 20 to the power of 40. So our goal is then to find the correct rule path to reach the optimal leaf node in this large searching space. Although 20 to the power of 40 is just an upper limit of the design space, but there is no doubt that it's a very enormous and giant, very giant search space, and brute force search can hardly succeed. And we definitely need a more intelligent algorithm to search for the best design. So let's break down the whole searching algorithm into each step. At each step, we actually have a decision-making subproblem where we need to make a decision about which rule we are going to pick for this step. And suppose now if we have a very accurate heuristic function that can tell us the optimal design in each sub-branch after we apply each rule, then we can just simply follow it. For example, in this case here, after applying rule 2, the best design in the sub-searching space is of score 6.5, which is the highest one among the 3 applicable rules at the first step. So we can just select rule 2 at this step, and then we can follow the heuristic function again in each step until we reach the optimal leaf node. So that's the high-level idea. And based on this high-level idea, we introduced our graph heuristic search algorithm here. In each iteration, the algorithm starts from the design phase. In this phase, the algorithm tries to search for the optimal robot design in the grammar space. And at each step, it uses a learned heuristic function to predict the value of each branch. And the heuristic function here is modeled by a graph neural network, which takes a complete or an incomplete design as input and predicts the values and predict the best optimal design in the selected sub-branch in this search space. And then the searching direction is then guided by the predicted value of the graph grammar, and then it will run in an epsilon greedy strategy to find to run from top to down until we find a final design. And after we sampling a design, the algorithm enters the evaluation phase to evaluate the performance of the sample robots in simulation through model predictive control. And then the design and its performance score are added to the design buffer. And finally, this loop concludes with a learning phase to improve the heuristic function from a collect data in the design buffer. So we use all the data in design buffer to improve our heuristic function in each iteration. And the algorithm starts with a random initialized heuristic function and changes the epsilon value of the search over iterations to gradually transition from pure exploration to exploitation. Now let's see some cool results. Here is a robot optimized for the flattering task. And in this task, one successful strategy is to place the limbs space far from each other on the body and giving them a full range of motion to move it very fast forward. And here's another insect-like robot optimized for the flattering task. And the optimal design has two. So here is the robot optimized for the watering for the climbing task to climb a stair terrain. And the optimal design has two strong front legs to help it to climb easily. And here are some interesting results from a follow-up work. Those are two humanoid-like robots discovered purely by the searching algorithm during the search for the spinning task. And the first one is a figure skater robot, and the second one is a break dancing robot. So there is no any prior input to this search algorithm. And the secret sauce behind the graph heuristic search is twofold. First, we leverage the generalizability of the learned heuristic function to generalize the information we collected from the explored branch to predict the performance of the unexplored branch. And second, as the search proceeds, the searching algorithm samples more and more designs, which can help us to refine the graph heuristic function better. And in turn, the improved graph search, the improved heuristic function helps the searching algorithm find better designs. So these two parts actually improve each other iteratively in each iteration. Okay, so we have discussed our techniques for solving the single objective robot optimization problems. Now let's move on to the problems with multiple objectives. Due to time limit, I will very briefly introduce our high-level ideas of each project and demonstrate the experimental results. And I'm happy to chat offline if you are interested in the more in the technical details. I'll start with the first work, where we present an evolutionary learning algorithm to find the Pareto optimal control policies for multiple objectives. The high-level idea of our approach is to learn a prediction model from the optimization history data, and this model is then used to guide, is then leveraged to guide the searching algorithm, the evolutionary algorithm, to allocate the computing resource to the Pareto regions which can still be improved. And here are the Pareto optimal policies computed by our algorithm for a worker example. The first objective is the forward speed, and the second objective is the energy efficiency. And each gray dot on the left plot is the neural network policy. And we show 10 different policies on the Pareto front, from the fastest one to the most energy efficient one on the right side. And here are the Pareto policies for the hopper. Two objectives here are the running speed and energy and jumping height. And we also select 10 policies on Pareto front and visualize there. And in this work, we also conduct Pareto analysis and construct a continuous Pareto representation. By having a continuous Pareto front representation, the user can be even more flexible to select different policies to satisfy their arbitrarily selected trade-offs between different objectives. And here is an example of Ant, where we can smoothly transition from the policy for maximizing its y-axis speed to the policies maximizing its x-axis speed. now it's transitioned to the axis directional movement. And next, I will show some results from our work to co-optimize the robot's shape and control for multiple objectives. So in this work, we extend the Graphql search algorithm I introduced earlier into a multi-objective scenario. The key idea here is that we learn a universal heuristic function that takes the partial design as input and also the preference weight as input. And then this universal function will predict the optimal design under this preference weight in the subsearching space so that it can guide the multi-objective search strategy. Here are some interesting visual results. In the first problem, we have two objectives: the forward locomotion in a water scenario and a jumping height. And on the left side, each dot is again the rewards of a Pareto optimal robot design. And here are two robots whose structure is well optimized for jumping, but not allow them to move forward at all. And next, we show the robots with two strong legs to allow them to allow it to jump. Meanwhile, the green revolute joint allow it to move forward very slowly. And here the optimal robot for the watering task, which is suboptimal for jumping due to its heavy body and relatively weak legs. And then we show a three objective example. Here we have the locomotion task and jumping task similar as before. And we further have the third objective to measure the robot ability and agility around the vertical axis. And here we demonstrate a robot design discovered by our algorithm, which is not optimal in any of those objectives, but performs equally well on each of them. Finally, I'm going to give a quick summary and discuss some future work. First of all, having good design and design space representation is very crucial for computational robot design. A good design representation should be expressive and result in a complex set of parameters. It's also necessary to guarantee that the design optimized by our representation is always valid so that the design can be always manufactured easily after we optimize it. And finally, a good design representation should be easy to be optimized. And we demonstrate that we can use a deformation-based representation for the continuous shape morphology for robots. And this representation enables us to use some efficient numerical gradient-based optimization with only box constraints. And for the robot discrete topology, we show that a graph grammar-based representation that can effectively constrain the design space to be manufacturable, and it can also convert the complex topology optimization problem into a sequential decision-making problem. Next, the simulation is an important game player in the computational robot design pipeline. First, the speed of the simulator is usually the bottleneck of the speed of the whole pipeline. And to improve the speed of simulator, we adopted the GPU-based parallelization to accelerate the simulation. And second, a good simulator can offer not only the passive evaluation of the robot, but it should also able to offer the ability to actively exploit the underlying dynamics model of the robot and the task. And inspired by this, we develop a differentiable physics simulator that can provide the analytical gradients for all the robot control and physics parameters. And to achieve the optimal performance of a robot, we can optimize different aspects of the robot design. For example, we can optimize only the control for robots. We can co-optimize its continuous shape and the control together, or we can also optimize the discrete shape topology as well and the control strategy together. And different combinations require different optimization techniques. And we have demonstrated that our solutions for each of those combinations. And a good takeaway from this thesis is that while numerical gradient-based optimizer can improve the optimization efficiency of continuous robot variables, learning-based approach might become necessary when more complex and discrete variables are involved. Although I have demonstrated a bunch of algorithms for either optimizing control or co-optimizing the robot shape and control, there is still a missing of an all-in-one optimization problem, all-in-one optimization algorithm over all the shape and control variables. So ideally, we should have a co-optimization algorithm to jointly optimize for discrete shape topology, continuous shape parameters, and the feedback control policy for a robot in one pass. And we have some preliminary attempts along this direction. However, the current algorithms are only demonstrated on single rigid body system and without any contact to the environment. So those examples are the drones and unmanned underwater vehicles. Another assumption of this thesis is that we consider the shape as the only variable for our hardware design of the robot. However, robot hardware design should also include other aspects, such as the sensors and actuators. The sensors determine what type of signals the robot can observe from the environment. And the actuator determines what kind of actions the robot can react back to the environment. So the design, thus the design of the sensors and actuators will affect heavily the shape and control design of the robot as well. Therefore, how to optimize for sensors and actuators and the control and shape together is the very interesting direction to explore in the future. And computational robot design cannot claim as a success without the success of sim-to-real. In my mind, there are two types of sim-to-real we need to satisfy for. First is the hardware sim-to-real, which means that the optimized robot design must be able to be manufactured. And we address this by effectively constraining the robot design space by proper robot design representations. And the second is control sim-to-real, which comes from the dynamics mismatch between real world and simulated, so mismatch between the real world and physics simulation. And there has been a lot of effort in the robotics field to narrow down this sim-to-real gap. And I also had some preliminary attempts on sim-to-real for hybrid UAV, as mentioned by Wojtek before, and also some attempts on sim-to-real for tactile-based manipulation control in a recent submission. However, the current techniques are still quite limited and highly problem-specific, and they are all far from satisfying the needs of a general-purpose computational robot design pipeline. So this concludes the technical part of my presentation. Next, please allow me to spend a few minutes making some acknowledgements to the people who helped me during my PhD journey. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank my advisor, Wojtek. So thank you for offering me this very special journey ticket to MIT and always encouraging me to conduct impactful research and to get distracted from those low-hanging fruits. I also thank Wojtek for his extreme patience and tolerance in my very first leading project at MIT, which took me almost 2 years to complete. And that was my first attempt to get into the robotics field. And I went through many different detours and failures in that project. And without Wojtek's patience and encouragement, I might already give up and never knock out the door of robotics anymore. I would also like to thank other professors on my thesis committee. Many projects presented today cannot happen without help from Daniela and Pukit. I thank Daniela for always sharing her broad knowledge and broad research view to us, and always encouraging us to keep excited, keep motivated, and keep the gradients of the projects. I would also like to thank Pukit for providing his very professional advice from a perspective of a machine learning expert. And beside the professors on my thesis committee, I would also like to extend my special thanks to Xin. Xin told me everything about differentiable rigid body simulation, and is always super patient to answer all my questions when I encountered during the simulation implementations. I would also like to thank the senior students in the group who were also my office mates when I first came to MIT. Thank you guys for helping me fit into the group. And I also like to thank Adriana, Bo, and Tao for mentoring me in my very first 2 projects at MIT and show me how to conduct research. And I would also like to thank all my local and external collaborators in my projects. My PhD would not have been possible without help and support from all of you guys. I would also like to extend many thanks to all of the CDFG current and former members. I will miss every barbecue we have had at the MIT Sailing Pavilion and every hearty group dinner we enjoyed together. I would also like to thank all my teammates on MIT table tennis team for the practice in these centers and for the games we fought together in the regional and in the division computations. Next, I would like to express many of my thanks to all my friends during my PhD journey. This journey would be much less fun without the trips, the dinners, the board games, and poker nights together with you guys. And I also appreciate all the evenings we were together at TD Garden to support Celtics. And next, I would like to thank my girlfriend, Xia. We met in February 2019, and it has been our 4th year. And I'm so sorry that sometimes I might be too busy to spend enough of time to staying with you. And thank you so much for always understanding and supporting me, and for always staying up with me when I was on those crazy project deadlines. And finally, I would like to give my biggest thanks to my parents for always supporting me and trusting each of my decisions. And they always ask me to keep relaxed and tell me that study and the career are just a small portion of my life, and my physical and mental health is always the most important part for me. And the 2 pictures on the left and on the right side were taken during my last visit to China in January 2019. And because of the visa problem and the pandemic, it has been 3.5 years since the last time we met together. And I really miss you guys, and I wish we can see each other very soon in the near future. And that concludes my defense. Thank you so much for your attention.
Right, here's the deal. Now you guys can, now there are questions from the audience. So you guys please ask the questions in relation to today's talk. And then you guys all leave, and only Daniela, Poti, and I stay, and we ask an extra set of questions.
Sure.
Hopefully it fast. All right. Yeah. All right, guys.
So yeah, that was a great presentation so far. Do you have any ideas about extending to directions where you have multiple agents collaborating on the task, complex tasks that cannot be executed by CPUs, or maybe it's still one topology that has 2 agents or like sort of finger snaps into 2 walls to perform complex computation tasks?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good question. So multi-agent task, or the co-optimization for multi-agent, is a very interesting task. So actually we have some ongoing projects with some undergrads and another PhD student in our lab to do some co-optimization for topology and shape for some for multi-agent for the soft body robots. So we had a paper last year for single body soft body robot optimization, which called is evolutionary gene. And so which was published in NeurIPS. And then this year we are going to work on how to extend that framework to co-optimizing multiple different agents, their shape and topology, and for some given tasks.